Welcome to the Injustice Anywhere podcast.
Tonight we will be discussing the advocacy efforts that took place in the Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito case. We're not going to get into the actual details of the case. Those have been thoroughly argued online for over 7 years now, and Amanda and Raffaele are now exonerated. For those that are not familiar with the case, college student Meredith Kircher was murdered on November 1st, 2007 in Perugia, Italy. A botched investigation led to the wrongful arrest of 3 innocent people, Amanda Knox, Raffaele Sollecito, and Patrick Lumumba. The arrest occurred all before the crime scene evidence was even analyzed. Police held a press conference announcing that 3 people committed the murder and proudly proclaimed case closed. When prints at the scene led investigators to another man, Rudy Gaudet, the authorities refused to admit their mistake. They simply removed Patrick Lumumba, who had an airtight alibi, and added in Rudy Gaudet. They then began a lengthy PR campaign to convince the world that their updated trio committed the crime. The truth is that only one person committed the crime, and it was Rudy Gaudet. Amanda and Raffaele spent over 7 years of their lives on a legal roller coaster, 4 of those years behind bars. Here's a basic summary of how it all unfolded. Both were convicted of murder, and then they were both acquitted on appeal. Then they were convicted again after their acquittals were overturned by the Supreme Court, only to be acquitted once again when the Supreme Court would later overturn their convictions. I know, that's a lot to think about. But don't worry, we have all those details and all aspects of this case on both of our websites, AmandaKnoxCase.com and InjusticeInPerugia.org. If you are new to this conversation, I highly recommend that you take a look. The important thing to remember is the fact that Amanda and Raffaele are now exonerated, and that decision is final. Now, to get to the topic we want to discuss tonight, during Amanda and Raffaele's trials, they received an amazing amount of support from all around the world. Advocacy efforts were seen in full force. Sadly, many of the cases that we currently work on with Injustice Anywhere that are just as equally deserving of support often go unnoticed. Our goal tonight is to see if we could learn from this case so that we can better help other cases that are in dire need of attention. Our guests tonight will be Karen Pruett and Philip Mause. Karen Pruett played a vital role in the advocacy of Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito. Philip is an attorney and advocate that strongly supported Amanda and Raffaele and is actively involved in the discussion of several cases, including Kirstin Lobato, another Injustice Anywhere featured case. Hi, Karen. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Very happy to have you. Hi, Phil. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Bruce, Karen. Glad to be aboard.
Now, before we get into tonight's topic, I'd like to know how each of you got involved with this case, the Amanda Knox case. So can each of you give a brief summary of how you got involved? Let's start with Karen.
Amanda is a community member, and I was drawn into the case after I discovered that a lot of what was being told about her in the media was incorrect. And once I began to do my own research, it was absolutely appalling what had happened to her, wrong on so many levels. And I think Steve Morse said it best. Once you saw what was going on, you couldn't look away. So there was no way I could back away from the case. I needed to help in any way I could.
Now, how many years have you been involved?
It's been 5 years with the advocacy, 3 years here on the island with just our local friends and family. We discussed what was going on with her, so a total of 8.
Okay, so it's been a long process for sure.
Oh, indeed.
Phil, what was it that attracted you to the case, Phil, and did it spark your interest in other cases? Or I know you advocate for other cases. Had you already been an advocate previously?
No, I hadn't been an advocate recently. I'm a retired lawyer, and I was a law professor for a while at the University of Iowa, and we had what was called a prison mail program where we would review mail from prisoners raising legal issues. One of those cases I initiated resulted in a federal habeas corpus proceeding which resulted in a person who had been sentenced for first-degree murder being released and exonerated. So I had some experience that way. I hadn't really been involved in the advocacy effort recently, and I was a Johnny-come-lately to this case. All I had heard about the case was sort of the media buzz, and I had a vague impression that there had been some kind of sex orgy that went bad in some place in Italy, and it was creating a lot of stir. And around August, September 2011, I decided, as a lawyer, I'd like to, read up on it, and there sure was a lot of stuff online. I fairly early reached the conclusion that no reasonable finder of fact could find them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And then I really tried to read in depth into it and came to the conclusion that they were innocent just about the time that the Hellman verdict was coming out. And I can remember watching that in our family room with my wife and telling her that I think they would probably be getting off for what we call time served for obstruction of justice, which was pretty close to what the Hellman verdict, the way it came out. And then after that, I realized that there was this backlash coming from the guilters, and so I got involved in the advocacy. I've written a few articles on Ground Report. I've written on my blog, on Seeking Alpha, written other places, commented all over the place, because I thought it was really outrageous, some of the things that were being said on the internet and elsewhere.
Now, you've been a very active member of our forum, InjusticeAnywhereForum.com. We'll get into the forum a little bit later, as it's one of the tools that we use in our efforts. But so this case was the case that led you to look into other cases.
It really was. I looked at it. I was pretty appalled at what was happening. I was also appalled at some of the... And I knew as a lawyer that the media almost always gets the details of complex litigation wrong. But in this case... It really seemed some of the stuff that I saw was pretty extreme. I had also had experience with a big litigation media effort right before I retired. I represented the Native Americans who were bringing the legal action against the Washington football team on the grounds that the name is disparaging to Native Americans. And that case, we had a huge local media storm here in the Washington, D.C. area, and I think we actually wound up winning the media battle by, again, putting the facts out there and in a very calm and reasoned manner, really turned around the public sentiment on that issue. So now we've had favorable editorials all over the place, and a number of political leaders coming out on our side of that issue.
Sounds good. Your situation is similar to mine. This was the first case I ever took any interest in at all. To this day, I really still cannot say why I became so involved. What I do know is that I could not get the case out of my head. I looked at Amanda's family, and I wondered what we would do as a family if we were ever in their shoes. I wondered who would help our child. If our son or daughter was in Italy, trapped in that system the way Amanda was, I looked at my life and I wondered who would stand up to help my child. I think that was what really stuck with me. And I'll be honest with you, it was a life-changing moment because it opened my eyes to an epidemic that I had been blind to up until that point. I mean, as you both know, my interest in the case led to the creation of Injustice in Perugia, or as some call it, IIP, which would grow quickly thanks to an outstanding group of people that I'm seriously honored to be friends with. You are both included in that group, of course. IIP has now branched off into our current organization, Injustice Anywhere. So we've made something good out of something that started off pretty horrible. So I think that that's a positive outlook. Hopefully we can keep heading in that right direction.
I think the reason that this particular case was so compelling to so many people was the international aspect of it. We had, Italy, the UK, and the United States all battling. It was like a turf war over who Amanda and Raffaele were, and that was how I became involved, was being in Amanda's community. I was exposed to literally hundreds of people that knew her, remembered her from her childhood. They were personal family friends, and none of them were being listened to, as opposed to how the media tends to run to the serial killer's family and hang on their every word. Nobody did that with Amanda. And what I saw when I got to know you guys was that most of the media was wholly lacking in the defense point of view, and so that became my forte. And thankfully, Injustice in Perugia was already up and off, moving forward when I got to know all you guys. And so the media was really incredible. Even to this day, they don't want to be wrong about what they did, and it was almost entirely the prosecution's point of view. So it was shocking to me as a citizen to realize that the media was pushing one point of view and not giving the public the other point of view so that people could make an informed decision. And that was why Amanda was so beaten up on in the media, is because everybody thought she was this person that was created by the Italians. And then when you look at my point of view, you see in her community so many people speaking out for her and so many people who knew her personally, and the Italians did not know her. They created this persona, and so it was just incredibly wrong. And I was just stunned, and still am stunned with the way the media behaved, and in particular the tabloids. And I think the one big lesson I walked away with was that much of the tabloid media and the mainstream media use copy and paste. The investigative journalism practically does not happen anymore, or it comes along weeks later. And that was probably the biggest shock to me, is how much copy and paste are today's media is using.
That was a learning experience for me as well, because I truly hadn't paid attention before this case. It's funny you brought up the international aspect, because that was my first question. There's a couple questions that immediately come to mind when thinking about advocacy with this case. And the first one was the international aspect the sole reason for all of the attention coming from the U.S.? And if it was, that poses a serious challenge for us as we look to gain attention for these other cases that are already in the United States. We have one of our featured cases in Canada. But were there other aspects that drew people in, or was this international aspect the sole reason? What do you think about that topic, Phil?
Well, I think this case was, and I think I wrote an article on this for Ground Report, sort of the perfect storm. I think the case was really ideal for the media for several reasons. Some of them just practical. The Italian judicial system, the system of having one hearing a week, and then going away and coming back a week later and sort of running this on for months and months, really produces a much better media story than a one-week trial and jury verdict in the United States. It gives you sort of a constant, it's like football. You have every week, you have a story, then you can kind of reflect on it between, and then you have another story, and it goes on and on forever. So that was a big help. I think, frankly, the fact that you had both the victim and the accused attractive young women, that the media loves that. It was in an interesting, fascinating part of Italy that added to the story. The prosecutor was an interest, whatever else you say about him, he is a, quote, interesting character. And you had a lot of interesting characters in the case. And so it just made for a terrific story. I was not surprised that the media got it very wrong, because any piece of complex litigation I've been involved in, and this was complex in many ways, the media generally gets it wrong. They're not able to devote the resources to it to get it right, and they have to come up with a catchy headline. They have to simplify the story, dumb it down, and get it down to a catchphrase, and that leads itself to misrepresentation.
Sure. I think the media, it can be a strong tool, but I think the negatives and the positives kind of neutralize each other. I don't think there's a huge benefit because, like Karen said, a lot of it is cut and paste media these days, and the research isn't there. It's not accurate, like you said. A lot of it is just a mess. When we looked at articles about this case, we would say every time it was a good article, we would say, that was pretty good. They only messed up this and this and this. And that was our criteria for a good article. How often did we come across an article that was 100% accurate? I don't think we ever have. And we're not asking for 100%. I mean, that's a strong threshold. We were happy to get a 50 or 60% correct article.
I don't know. I thought some of my articles in Ground Report.
Now we're going to talk about citizen journalism in a little bit. Not to get away from the mainstream. Now there's one big question, and this challenges anyone who is currently an advocate for any case. And I do have people ask me this question quite often, and it's an important question. I'm going to let Karen have the first shot at it. The question is this: does public advocacy really do anything to help? Or will the various justice systems, whether it be here, Canada, Italy, the UK, will those systems draw the same conclusions regardless of our advocacy efforts?
No, I don't think so. I think we did make a difference, and I think it was because Injustice in Perugia gave the public a platform. When I began to write, I ran up against mainstream media, and they wanted to have certain things done a certain way. For instance, calling Amanda a convicted killer. And when I was writing for the local paper, which is a tiny little paper, nothing mainstream, but this is the paper that Amanda's family read, her grandparents read, and there was absolutely no way I was going to call her a convicted killer in that particular paper when I was trying to explain to our community what had happened to her. And so finding the right paper in the community, the one that was outside of the mainstream, was the one that gave me the freedom to do that. I could say what needed to be said, give the Knox family a platform in the community that was not constrained by what mainstream media was telling all their reporters to do. And I found the same thing with Ground Report, where I did have quite a bit of freedom. And I think most of us who were in Ground Report ended up with quite the readership. We, a lot more readership than I really expected to have happen. And so it really, it made me realize that I actually had more freedom than mainstream media.
Which is absolutely the truth. But I think that our articles, I don't know, sometimes I looked at it, I think we did a lot of things right, and sometimes I think me in particular, I think I was a little bit too aggressive at times at the people that were on the wrong side of the story in the media. Your articles were incredibly informative. They were very long. I'd read them in sections. I will be honest with you, I never read one of your articles all at once.
Well, I am the researcher and the educator, and that was my focus. Is I wanted to educate people on the case, and sometimes that did dive right into writing a dang book.
If I had to write my articles again, I would still go after the Andrea Voigts and the Barbie Nadeaus. I'd still do it, but I don't think I'd be quite as aggressive with it. but as it turns out, it was me that kind of had that job. I wrote the first article for a website that ended up taking the article offline, actually, because it was
it was a very emotional case, and it all of us were very angry about what happened, and a lot of what you were doing and saying in your articles was what we wanted to say, but some of us were in a position where we needed to behave ourselves. We needed to be more mainstream. But when you compared what we did to what mainstream journalism did, they have so many constraints that, usually if they had their own column was when you saw the emotions. And normally you don't get to see that. And so it didn't bother me a bit that you were angry about what some of these other quote-unquote mainstream journalists were doing, because they were cheating. They were putting out the prosecution's point of view and pretending like that was objective, and it was absolutely wrong.
So we have a general consensus here between us three that citizen journalism is a good tool to use for advocates for all cases.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think it's very important, and I think sometimes the things that start in citizen journalism, what happens in an open society like ours, and there's a whole separate story about journalism in Italy that I'm very concerned about, the lack of freedom of the press in Italy. But these stories tend to get started often in the back alleys of the media, citizen journalism. The whole Bill Cosby thing got started with a stand-up comic named Hannibal Buress, and it gets started and gets picked up. I've seen that happen in the Kirstin Lobato case. A lot of the arguments that we started making on Ground Report and on IIP and Injustice Anywhere, a lot of those arguments have now started to get picked up in the Las Vegas media. So if you keep hammering away at it in citizen journalism, it does start getting picked up. They do look at these things. When someone has to write a story, they Google it, and a lot of these things turn up. So it does have an impact.
It does indeed.
I absolutely agree. There's two sites that I would recommend for those that are looking to write articles on a case they're advocating for. The first is the longest one we've used. We've used it for several years now. That's groundreport.com. They accept everybody. You just sign in and you write. Your article views will correlate to the quality of your article. You might get your first article might get attention, but if it's poorly written, you're not going to gain a following. So it is important that you take your time and you properly edit and you do the best possible job you can if you want to advocate for your case. The other one is Digital Journal. It's not quite as easy to get onto. You have to submit 2 pieces of work that have been published elsewhere, and they review the case. They review your account, and it usually takes about 30 days to get approved. But I do like their layout. I think it's a professional setup, and I think it's another good source. So we do recommend citizen journalism. The other, probably the primary tool we've used over the years is Facebook. And I never used Facebook before I got involved with this case. And if my wife hadn't signed me up for Facebook, I probably never would have heard about this case. I just got on Facebook, I started browsing around, and I found an old discussion about the Amanda Knox case. And that's really where it started for me. Now, Karen, you're a frequent user of Facebook, and you've operated several support pages over the years. What advice would you offer to new advocates just getting started?
Well, I found Facebook to be an incredible crowdsourcing format. I'm a former office manager, so it became, I just sort of applied those skills to Facebook and managed all these different pages. And so a lot of what we were doing, it was filling a niche. and we would think to ourselves, well, we need to get this or that information out, and we just sort of devised ways using Facebook to do that. And so you would have your groups where everybody would meet and discuss how to do something or how to approach a problem, and then we would go out into Facebook. For instance, there's a lot of Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito pages, and so the group that I worked with, we would take information, some of the good articles that were written or articles that our own folks had written, and we would post these to the pages. And so the people who were getting notifications for those would see fresh new stuff. Or if we wanted to focus on a particular topic, we would round up all the articles that had to do with that. And then we would, every week, we would focus on a particular topic. If we wanted somebody to know about the prosecutor, if we wanted people to know about Amanda or Raffaele or what had happened to them. And so I found it to be an amazing resource for doing a lot of the basic things that an office manager does. And I can see the applications going past what we did with the advocacy. So Facebook was amazing to me. And then Twitter, I was surprised to find out that Twitter is becoming the new email, specifically because you've gotten the message down to that 140 characters, and so in the realm of the celebrities and the media, they're not getting huge manifestos from their readership anymore. They're getting these short little bitty messages, and I found that email is becoming a thing of the past, and so that was quite surprising to me.
I'm not sure I like it, but that's the way it is. So we really need to adapt with the current trends. I personally love email, but I go to my email every day and I find less and less email. People are using texting on their phones or using Twitter. The younger crowd's not using Facebook, but to be honest, the crowd that is active with advocacy is not that group. We don't get a lot of people 18 to 25 that do this. I wish we did, but we don't.
Yeah.
I think Twitter kind of reaches a wider base. It's not just that young crowd.
Yeah, and that was why I was so surprised when I started noticing that a lot of the celebrities and media and a lot of people were starting to shift over to Twitter and ignore emailing.
Right. Now, my advice for anybody that's going to create a page for an advocacy case that they want to advocate for, any case of wrongful conviction, is be sure to create a private group as well as a public one. We learned early on that there are many conversations that are not meant for public ears.
Yeah. I think as well, too, is that I think the public should pay close attention to Injustice in Perugia, the forum, the website, our Facebook page, because that actually is a wonderful template for anybody that wants to approach an advocacy, how to get organized, that sort of thing. And I see Injustice in Perugia becoming a template and an inspiration, like you basically took that same thing and you turned it into Injustice Anywhere and expanded upon it. And so I would suggest anybody that wants to go this route and advocate for somebody to read through, see what we've done in there, and just replicate it.
That's a good idea.
I think it is important. I agree that there should be a private as well as a public sector, but it is important to have an open public sector, although at a certain point some messages may have to be deleted that are just really abusive. But I was very impressed when I first started looking at this case that Injustice in Perugia really featured an open debate. And it was the one place you could go where you would have people from both sides arguing this out. All the other websites, Perugia Murder File and True Justice, immediately would delete any kind of contrary opinion or posting on their site. So it would be a little bit like living in North Korea and trying to figure out what was going on based on reading a North Korean newspaper.
Sure.
And I was very, very impressed about it. And it was a real asymmetry in the way the whole thing was being handled. So I think it is important to have that kind of open forum where everybody can go at it and, give us your best shot. Tell us what your best argument is that we're wrong. Let's hear it. We want to hear it.
See, we juggle with this every day at the aspect of this, and I'll be honest with you, a lot of people early on in Injustice in Perugia did not like the fact that we created a forum where you could debate. And Sarah was a huge part of the initial building of that forum. And we discussed this in great detail, night after night after night. How far do you let it go? And what comments you delete? What comments do you keep? But the truth is, debate brings attention to a case. And the guilters don't realize it, but the pro-guilt crowd brought attention to this case. There are people advocating for Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito and have now moved on to advocate for other cases because of them. Because people were so enraged by their activities that they took it on themselves to challenge them. And once they got into it, they learned about wrongful convictions, and now they're part of Injustice Anywhere. So as horrible as I think that group is, they've actually done something to benefit our cause as well. And it would anger them to know that, so I'm happy to say it.
They created their own worst enemy.
Well, in drama school, they say the most important thing is conflict. So if you try to set something up with absolutely no conflict, I think it's artificial, and it always makes me a little suspicious too when somebody does that. So I think it was very good to keep the conflict going because it did sort of draw more attention to the thing and drew people in. Now, as a lawyer, I have to say, whenever I look at one of these cases, the first thing I try to get my hands on is the most persuasive arguments the prosecution has been able to make. I try to get a copy of their summation of any briefs they've written. In the Amanda Knox case, some of the first books I read were Barbie Nadeau and Faux Lane. I wanted to understand what the argument on the other side was. I wanted to be sure I understood that before I became an advocate for their innocence. Once I understood it, I was kind of amazed at how little there was, but I wanted to be sure I understood that.
Sure, and that's a good position to take. You can't see it because we're on a radio station, but right to my left here is a bookcase, and it has all of the books on this case. Not only the ones I agree with, because I truly believe that we need to listen to everybody that spoke about this case as far as the authors go. Some people on the internet, for me, don't have any reason to listen to anymore, but I really thought it was good to get an insight on all of the authors and see where they stood. And to believe it or not, no matter what I read, it simply reinforced my position, because I truly believe that we knew from the start of our group that we were correct, and in the end, it prevailed. So reading another book, people shouldn't be afraid to read the opposition to think they're going to change their mind, because if their argument is strong, then they should have no fear of that at all.
Absolutely. And that was what I meant by with the media when the media was mostly pro-prosecution in the beginning. They didn't offer that other side of the story. And, every lawyer knows that both sides are important in a court case.
Sure. Now, we have had people that are afraid to go onto Facebook. We've had a couple of our featured cases where the families, I'm not going to name them, it's a private matter, obviously. They were afraid to use Facebook because they were afraid of the negative comments. It's difficult to convince people close to a case that we want to have an open debate, because anytime they hear something negative about their loved one or their close friend, it's painful. But sometimes we really do need to explore all of the opinions to draw the correct conclusion. And if the person is innocent, our conclusions are going to be innocent if we're looking at all the facts.
Indeed. And when you talked about...
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Phil. Go ahead.
Well, I'm saying Facebook, Ground Report, a lot of these things where everybody can sort of sound off. This has become like the village square in a 19th century county seat where everybody gets together and drinks at the same bar and goes to the same church and exchanges stories. This is what is really being worked out on the Internet now, and it is filtering up into the mainstream media. I mean, some of my stories on Ground Report, I've had well over 10,000 views, and one I did recently, I think we had about 300 comments. This was on the Joe Paterno situation at Penn State. I wrote an article on that recently.
Sure.
And people really jump in on these things and learn things, and you do see people who turn around or at least have an understanding that there's a balance to the narrative. It's a very important part of a functioning democracy. The other thing that's very important is to create a much broader public perception that wrongful convictions are common, that this isn't all that unusual, that this is a major problem. And as I wrote a small thing on the website today, I really think we have to be looking at law reform here as a serious part of our effort to start finding sympathetic legislators to put in legislation to really clean up the criminal justice system in the United States.
Absolutely. I have that written down here as something I wanted to get to with you to discuss, because it's one of those things that it's a little bit off the main path of somebody who's advocating, but it takes a look at the bigger picture. And I just don't know how the average citizen can get involved with helping with that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit towards the end of the show, because it's a little off the main path of what we're talking about now. I want to get a couple more points in on Facebook, because it is really one of our primary tools to use to advocate for a case. The Facebook pages are great. Sarah does an awesome job on our Facebook, the actual page, because every time you post on that page, it also works with Twitter. So when you post it on the page, you send out a tweet. So you're doing double the work with one post. And it really works out very well. So I recommend that if you have a group page, that you also make just a page, it's called. It's not a group, it's a page. Because it's another tool that Facebook provides. And the true thing is about Facebook is advocates must not be shy. Speak your mind. You never know who's going to be listening. You never know who's going to be on Facebook that day that might see your post. We found Steve Moore on Facebook. His wife was talking about the Amanda Knox case on Facebook, and that's how we met Steve Moore. And we all know the history of Steve Moore now. He was heard on every major network all around the world talking about this case. He was a huge voice for Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito, and that entire process started on Facebook. So don't be shy. Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid to contact people. The worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to say no. When I emailed Steve Moore and I said, would you like to write an article for Injustice in Perugia? We'd love to have you come aboard. The worst thing that could have happened is he says no. I would have moved on with my day. It wouldn't have caused me any pain. I'm very happy he said yes. But people need to open up to others. Don't be afraid to talk about your case.
Well, I think when you talk about fear, what happened to me and a lot of other people regarding the bullying, the cyberbullying, that's what scares everybody off. And I was terrified. when they first started stalking me, I didn't know what to think about it. I'd never been involved with anything like that, and to have all these strangers talking about my home and my family and things like that. And I had to learn to tighten up the security in Facebook and be careful what I said on the forum and things like this. And most all of us who were in the middle of the case were stalked. And what I'd like to say to anybody listening is that probably about 99% of these people are just snarky little brats. They're not going to hurt you. All the vitriol they have is in a forum or a Facebook page. There were a couple that we are a little bit worried about, and but the amount of anger and vitriol that comes at somebody who's just advocating for their loved one or advocating for a group or something, they're not prepared for that. And I basically had to man up and decide, was I going to let these people chase me away when I knew that my friend's kid was innocent and that she needed help? Was I going to walk away? And how would I live with myself if I did that? And so I sucked it up. And that's the message I want to give to everybody. If you're afraid of the way that these people act, just remember you can turn off Facebook. You can turn off the forum. You can walk away. You do not have to let them own you. And the thing, at the very simplest term, these are bullies. They're nothing but bullies. We have done so much research on bullies and bullying, and in the United States and UK and Italy, everybody's familiar with this. They do the same things. They're very predictable, and so what I would suggest to the public is don't be afraid of them.
That's good advice. I've had a lot of people threaten me over the last few years. People have mentioned where I work. They've threatened to come to my store. They've threatened to do things like that. But that never happens. Nobody ever shows up because they're all talk. And
they just want to scare you with words.
One of the most dangerous people that we've followed for years is actually in Canada, and he's posted death threats. And the research was done. The people that know, that have Amanda's well-being at heart, they've researched this man. He cannot enter the United States. So at this point in time, he's not a threat. But those people, they should be looked into. Those people, you take screenshots and you report them if they take it to the next level. But 99% of the people aren't like that. They're just posting angry, horrible comments. I have no idea what's going on in their lives. I don't know why they're so angry. But those are the people.
Smart Alex. They're just doing it for they're smart Alex. They're doing it for, to get everybody all upset and worried, and they don't really mean it. They're just doing it to get attention.
Right. To tie all this in with the aspect of debate, I think that there are people out there that simply disagree with our opinions, and I think those are the people we should be debating. During an active trial, during an active case, Amanda and Raffaele are exonerated, so I don't debate the case anymore. But for our other cases, if somebody has a legitimate argument and they're speaking to you as an adult, I think open debate is good. People that are posting vile statements and just trying to aggravate, I think they should be ignored.
And the thing about debate that I found, too, is that none of them actually want to debate. They want to tell you what their opinion is, and that the actual real debate never happens.
Right. What were you going to say, Phil?
Well, I think the really scary thing about this case and a number of other cases, and it's a scary thing about a lot of really horrible things that happen in human society, is that a lot of the people on the other side of this really sincerely believe what they're saying, and I think there is this powerful force that works on the human mind called confirmation bias, and that people who sort of early on jump to the conclusion that they're guilty find that all sorts of evidence which is either ambiguous, irrelevant, or even evidence of innocence somehow confirms that initial narrative that somebody gets in his mind, and it is a very dangerous phenomenon, both politically and in the legal system. And I have to say, I do a lot of financial writing. It's a terrible problem financially. I mean, Bernie Madoff was able to go along for years because everybody believed he couldn't possibly be a fraud.
Sure.
And so it's very easy for people to lock into a very wrong idea. And, of course, if you really believe that they're guilty, I can imagine how people could be emotional about it.
Right, and that certainly does happen.
And the confirmation bias is something that I felt that the media played a huge part in that, because they were only reporting the prosecution point of view in those first few years.
It's very true.
And I think the prosecution itself was a victim of confirmation bias. I think they probably arrived at the scene. They jumped to the conclusion that it was a stage break-in. It had to be an inside job. There were only 3 people with keys. Bingo, and there you are, and the rest is history.
Right.
Yeah.
And once they got down that road, then every piece of evidence. I think my favorite one is, I think it was Mancini who said, this break-in looks exactly like another break-in that Rudy Goudet did. It's a second-story job, and he stepped on the grating to get in the second floor, and it's very similar. And this is further proof of Amanda Knox's guilt, because we know that Rudy would never have been stupid enough to stage this one, because he would realize that we would know that it looked just like his other break-in.
Right. How twisted do you have to be to get to that point?
Yeah, in other words, it looks just like a Rudy Goudet break-in. Therefore, it isn't a Rudy Goudet break-in.
So I think our basic conclusion...
I was stunned by the amount of gyration that they would do to get to these points. It was just absurd.
I think our general conclusion here, when it comes to debate online for those that are advocating for other cases, is debate is good if the person on the other side is willing to speak to you as an adult and have a good conversation. That can bring attention to a case, and that's positive. The other people that are just out to aggravate should probably just be ignored.
Mm-hmm.
I want to touch base on the media, because in this case, as we know, early on the media was completely against Amanda Knox. And it did shift over time, and Justice in Perugia did make efforts with the local media here in Seattle, where you're at, Karen, to change the tone, and we did send out press releases all over the place to media outlets. Now, for others that would like to send out press releases, can you give a few pointers? It doesn't have to be extensive, but just a few pointers on how long a press release should be and what are the basic topics that you have to include in every single press release.
Most press releases are right around 200 words, and you can find templates online and basically choose your own. We ended up with one that had Injustice in Perugia at the top for immediate release, and then the body of the work, and 1 or 2 links, and they suggest not doing more than that. So there's a lot of really good information for doing press releases. Getting the emails to send them out was quite a bit harder because of the shift over to Twitter. And as we went along with our press releases, I would lose 1 or 2 emails with every release we did. I would get a bounce back, and I would just delete them because it wasn't worth the time to track down a new email. And so the emails are getting to be harder and harder and harder to find.
And I know that the government emails are a big pain in the neck because you cannot email them directly. You have to go to their page.
Yeah.
I honestly don't think that there's a lot of benefit to sending messages to our Congress, but for people that have the time and the energy, anything's worth giving it a shot. But it's one of those things that I would probably shy away from.
I think developing a personal relationship with your local legislators is very important, and especially like in Amanda's case, Mary Cantwell was very open and willing to discuss her case whenever I had a question, but because Amanda and I fell outside, or we couldn't talk to our other legislators because we fell outside of their jurisdictions, and so you have to kind of stick with your one person. The thing that I found was really remarkable was when we decided to do a petition and found out that Change.org had a way to access emails into Congress and the entire Congress, the President, the House, the Senate, and then you could also add other emails, and so I added in the entire delegation for the Washington State because Amanda's a citizen here, and then we also added in the Italian Ministry of Justice and the UK's Home Office, and so every signature we had bounced email to them. So maybe they were not reading them, or maybe they deleted them. We didn't know, but the fact that something was going to these people every time you did every signature on your petitions. And so I thought that was really, really valuable. Something that Change.org offers that I didn't see in a couple of the other petition sites. And the other thing I would say is with a petition, you need to be very succinct. You can't just go out there and say, hey, we want this person, we want somebody to look at this case. When we finally sat down and worked on our petition, I had a Department of Justice lawyer working with me and about 50 other people from the Advocacy spread across the forums and the Facebook pages, and I was bringing in all this information, and we edited our petition for probably about 3 weeks. And by the time we got done, we started out with a couple of paragraphs, and we ended up with this amazing body of work. And it was very succinct. It named the laws that were broken. It brought attention to the case in the right way instead of just being something really vague. And so that would be another advice to people who are thinking about petitions. Look at it from the legal standpoint. What is going on with the person you're advocating for? What laws were broken, or in your for your case? Write those on a petition. Let your legislator know what you're thinking.
Now, Change.org petitions, that there's a debate going on with that too, even with some people inside of Change.org, whether or not the petitions actually help the wrongfully convicted. I, for one, am a fan. It's not so much the fact that this petition is going to be delivered to the person it's written to. It's the public attention that is gained from using it. It's just another tool online. And we wrote the petition for Ryan Ferguson. We started that petition. It's one of the most successful petitions Change.org has ever had. That was attention drawn to the case. We did it. We currently have a petition on Change.org for Jeffrey Havard as well. Some groups hesitate to use Change.org because they're afraid if it's not a huge success that it's going to look like a failure. And I don't see it that way. I see a case that has no attention at all. Bringing attention to it, regardless of how it is, if it's positive attention, is an avenue that should be taken. And I do think that the petition for Amanda and Raffaele did help to bring attention right here at the end before the Supreme Court ruling.
Well, another thing, you're always...
Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, another thing, you're always looking in terms of trying to get the media attention, even getting attention on Facebook. You're looking for a news hook. You're looking for something which has happened recently, which is new and is actually news. One thing you can do is if you have somebody who's got expertise, like we had Steve Moore, Ron Hendry, we had the Idaho Innocence people on the DNA issue. We had a number of people, when they come out and issue a report or make a statement that's news. One of the nice things about the petition is it gives you a news hook. We just hit 25,000. We just hit 100,000.
Correct.
That's the news. That gives you almost a built-in little news hook to come out with, and then explain the whole story.
You're always looking for little hooks that the media can take, because they do need something new. You know, like the Jeff Havard case, if nothing's happened in 3 years, it's very hard to get anybody to write an article on it. You need a little hook here and there. Now, another great tool to use that's on the list here that I jotted down are YouTube videos. It is important that you have somebody that is good with making videos make your video. But a few of the videos early on in the Amanda Knox case really were powerful to me. They drew me in. They showed me in 3 minutes' time how horrible the prosecution was, how horrible the investigation was, and showed me right there on YouTube in a very short amount of time, because people have short attention spans, that this was a horrible injustice. It was very effective, and I think that people really need to take advantage of it. Don't make a long video. Make it short and to the point, so somebody is going to sit there and watch it from the beginning to the end.
And then another thing is the memes on Facebook, too. Memes on Facebook do the same thing. It's a snapshot, and, you short to the point, something you can pass around. People see it, and they internalize it and move on.
Absolutely. We did quite a few of those as well. Find somebody who's good with artwork, find somebody who's good with Photoshop, and make memes. Nice, short, to the point. Some of ours were a little bit too long. Everything we did wasn't always perfect. You learn from your mistakes, and you try to get better as you move along. And if you come up with a project and it's a failure, forget about it. Move on. Learn from it. If we made a meme that's 10 paragraphs long and we know if nobody's reading the whole thing, we just don't post it anymore. It's not like it's a major failure. Don't worry about failing. Just keep moving forward.
Another thing I wonder about, given the enormous success that this podcast called Serial had recently, I'm wondering whether that is going to lend itself to advocacy in real cases.
That should be a nice plus.
Case and doing something like that.
It would certainly be a great plus. I think that right now, the wrongful conviction topic is very popular, and people need to take advantage of that are advocating. And it's popular for a reason. It's popular because if you do a Google alert for exonerations, you will see one or two pop up every week in your email. People are being exonerated at an enormous rate in this country alone. It's a major problem, and attention is on it. The spotlight is on it. Bill Ferguson recently spoke about that as well. Now is the time to get the attention to these cases because people are paying attention. Don't be afraid to talk about the case. If people look at you like you have three heads, move on to somebody else. It's not the end of the world.
No, I think that's very right. There have been these revelations about systemic failures in forensic investigation. The most recent, I guess, was the hair analysis by the FBI lab, and I think the public is becoming aware and ready to hear that, okay, here's the case, the guy was convicted, but it very well may be a wrongful conviction.
Absolutely. Another point that I have on the list here that I wanted to bring up, and it's not always easy to do, but it's very important to bring credibility to your case, is acquire all of the court documents. The first thing we did when we took the Jeffrey Havard case is we acquired all of the court documents. I have the transcripts here. I have it typed out in a book, and we also copied them so that they're available online. It brings credibility if you have full transparency. Everything available needs to be online for people to read, start to finish. Now, the Amanda Knox case posed an issue because we had the language barrier. And I think one of our failures was, and one of our advocates just posted this on Facebook, we failed in the first few years to put all of those documents online. It's a huge task, and we didn't have translators at the time, but we should have worked harder to get them. I know this is unique to this case. Most of our cases do not have this issue. This was very unique to the case where everything released is in Italian. and they release it in an old-fashioned way, so that you can't just pull it off onto a PDF file, because they're just sending it out in paper. So it made it difficult, but we should have made a greater effort to get those documents online early on. So looking back, that's something we can certainly improve on. And I think that people advocating for other cases can learn from that and make sure that first thing they do is gather every document they can find.
I think that's a great idea, and I think part of what was going on with Injustice in Perugia was we were finding our way, and that was why I think it would make an excellent template for other advocacies, because we learned along the way. Get those documents, post them in the public space, and as people came in and filled a niche, you had writers, you had translators, you had people who knew how to work on YouTube. And I think most advocacies could use that. It's finding the right people to do it.
Chris Halkides, he's posted on Facebook and on the Spreaker page, and he makes a very good point. He says here in a question, in some cases, like Lindy Chamberlain, the Duke Lacrosse case, and the Amanda Knox case, the characters of the defendants, their personal character, are portrayed in a very negative light. What should we learn from the Amanda Knox case to tell us how to change the story from a bad defendant to a poor case?
I think it was the wording.
Narrative?
It was like when I said to the editor here on Vashon, no, I'm not going to use convicted murderer and have her grandparents read that. And that was the first time that I realized you need to change the message, you need to change the wording. So you have to step away from descriptions that people have been using for a while and, come up with not necessarily new and fresh, but honest.
Right. I agree, too. I think that this case is unique as far as the media goes because the attention was so strong. It was so high. All these other cases, they might get 1 or 2 times a year where they have articles that are out, so they don't have quite the following that this one does. The Ryan Ferguson case was one that had quite a bit of attention. And I like to use as an example for those that approach me and say, how is it possible that 20 judges all thought that Amanda and Raffaele were guilty? That would never happen here in America. Well, guess what? It did. Ryan Ferguson lost 11 appeals. Ryan Ferguson is 100% innocent. Anybody that looks at that case and thinks he's guilty, I'm sorry, they're a moron. There's no other word for them. He was completely innocent, yet he lost 11 appeals, and that's in the United States of America. So we have our issues, too. It's not an Italian thing. It's right here in America as well. So people really need to understand that, too. And I think a lot of the attention we got for this case was because Americans were trying to protect another American. But I'm hoping that people will open their eyes and realize that we have the same problems here, different topics, different things, but we have problems in our justice system just like Italy does.
I think worse here, actually, in several important respects. In the United States, once you're convicted by a jury, your effort to get a second look at it anywhere in the process, either on appeal or in what's called post-conviction relief, has become very, very tenuous, especially since some amendments during the Clinton presidency. There were restrictions on federal habeas corpus. The Patriot Act included more restrictions on federal habeas corpus, and it has become extremely hard to turn the case around, not because it's hard to persuade the judge that you're innocent, but because there are all sorts of technical Byzantine rules about raising arguments at different times and in different ways, and whether evidence that the prosecution withheld, whether that's evidence that you should have been able to find out on your own, whether you made an argument too early, whether you made it too late, whether you missed a deadline. Incredibly complex Byzantine rules, to the point that many courts have just about come out and said it's perfectly constitutional in the United States of America for us to execute somebody who we know is innocent.
It's absolutely ridiculous, but it's true.
That's where we are right now.
Well, the thing that I came up against was the bureaucracy. In Amanda and Raffaele's case, it was a detention order signed by Menini that put them in the system, and a constitutional right, I forget which article it is, but there's a constitutional right in Italy that you have to have your day in court. And so between the detention order and the day in court is this whole huge, gigantic bureaucratic mess. And we have the same thing here in the U.S. It's in the UK. Every civilized country is dealing with the bureaucracy and these layers upon layers upon layers of rules and laws and things like that. And I think when I came out on the other side of this, the thing that impressed me the most is that the laws that are written for Italy and the United States are actually very good. I didn't really see anything wrong with them. It was the application by humans.
Right, human error.
I would disagree with that. I think in recent years, the restrictions on post-conviction relief, if courts literally follow those rules, definitely create the prospect. Logically, you can reason your way through it that we will be executing a lot of people that we know are innocent simply because procedurally they didn't raise an argument at the right time. They raised it too early. They raised it too late. The evidence that proves their innocence is evidence that they should have presented at the trial. One thing or another like that. That's right in the law. So our Constitution is very good, but Congress has done a real hatchet job.
Now, this ties right into the need for reform. We spoke about it earlier. Phil, what does the average citizen in this country, or any country, what power do they have to trigger reform of the justice system? What can we do?
Well, the support for various kinds of reform has come from some very unusual directions, both from the left and the right. A major advocate for sentencing reform, for example, is Grover Norquist. He's the one who gets most Republicans to sign a no tax increase pledge when they run for Congress. The system we have has become very expensive. And for people who are libertarians, there's no greater infringement on your civil liberties than to be wrongfully convicted of a crime and executed for it. So libertarians, people like Rand Paul, are starting to make noises. And the more publicity we get out about individual cases of really outrageous situations of wrongful conviction, it will begin to create the context for legislative efforts. And it's the old story, write your congressman, write your state legislator, because a lot of this happens at the state level rather than the federal level. Make everybody aware that the system is ridiculously expensive. It costs about as much to hold somebody in prison as it does to send them to Harvard Medical School, and we have 2.2 million people in prison now, more than any other country in the world, a higher percentage than any other country in the world, more African Americans in prison than there were blacks imprisoned by the South African regime at the height of apartheid. And we really have to clean up this mess if we're going to go out in the world and accuse other regimes of violating human rights.
And Justice Anywhere is hopeful that we can eventually make some progress with reform. We're a new group. I mean, we're getting started. We've been around a little while, but it takes time to build. And I'm hopeful that eventually we will start to really get into the reform aspect of it, because that's truly where the solution lies for the future. We currently have a lot of people...
But it starts with individual cases. You know, the whole idea of freedom of the press started with Peter Singer, and all of these things start with individual outrages, which build toward a move for generalized reform.
Which is absolutely true.
And I think it's really important for the public to be involved, but often we just don't know how to do it. And so having someplace like Injustice in Perugia that gives us the tools to work, with Facebook and write articles. A lot of us were stepping into those arenas for the very first time, really didn't know what we were doing, but I think I found it to be quite powerful that I finally felt that I had a voice in the system. I wasn't just a disenfranchised citizen.
Right. And as far as advocacy goes, people do find confidence when other people are listening to them. And if they feel like they can get through to one person, it gives them a little confidence to get to the next person. And I really believe that we kind of felt that sense with this case. We felt like we were accomplishing something. And once you feel that sense that you're part of something, it makes you want to continue to work harder to accomplish the next step, to the next level, to the next place. And I don't honestly have an answer of how those that are just getting started with a case that doesn't have media attention, how they get to that level. It's certainly a struggle. The only thing I can say is never give up. I'm going to use the Ryan Ferguson case again, because 10 years in prison, he was sitting in that prison with very little hope for a long time. And then an attorney comes along, Kathleen Zellner, who had seen Ryan's father fighting for his son for all these years, and Ryan's father is the true hero in all of that. But it took Kathleen Zellner to take the case for that really to get blown open. You can never give up because you don't know who's eventually going to come forward to help. I know that sounds difficult at times, but no matter how bleak and how devastating the situation seems, keep pressing forward. You never know what's going to happen.
That reminds me of the West Memphis 3 case where Damien Eccles said that they tried to kill him, 2 or 3 times, and each time people picked up the banner and started talking about it, and they stopped the execution. And eventually, all 3 boys were released. But it took Hollywood stepping into the fray.
Sure. There's a lot of different avenues to gain attention. I want to touch base on a couple different aspects of advocacy really quick because we're running a little long, which I knew we would do anyway, but that's okay. Mm-hmm. There's other aspects to it than just bringing public attention. One we touched base on when it came to documents. Now, Tam Alex from the Committee to Free Jamie Snow has done amazing work gathering documents through the Freedom of Information Act. Similar efforts are taking place in the Jeffrey Havard case, a case that I'm working closely with. These documents, sometimes the state hesitates, they don't want to release them, but you have the legal right to obtain them. So Tam is a member of our advisory board. If you want to contact us to learn more about how to go about using the Freedom of Information Act, we can get information to you on how to do that. But gathering documents is incredibly important. The other aspect is actual investigative work on cases. I hesitate to even bring that up without also discussing the risks, because nothing should be done in that situation without the approval of the defense attorneys. Private research can be beneficial. That means just reading through transcripts, looking for possible flags, or requesting the missing documents as we suggested. And if you find something that you think is important, discuss it in your private group. Don't necessarily take it public. And then send it to the defense attorneys and let them decide if it's important or not. We're not trying to make names for ourselves individually. I see things on Facebook occasionally where people are making their own breakthroughs on a case. If you truly want to help the person you're advocating for, send that information to the attorneys and see if it's useful. Facebook is not going to free the person that you are advocating for. It's just a tool for us to get to the next step. The satisfaction, truly, for an advocate, the satisfaction is seeing the people you're advocating for go free. And I'll tell you, when we all sat there... I saw
it as the biggest research group that any attorney could ever ask for.
That's it. That's absolutely right. And there was a couple things in this case that really stood out to me. The telephone records that were analyzed by IIP, they were used in the appeal. False confession expert Saul Casson, he analyzed the case for the defense after being contacted by us. We didn't go public with any of that. We kept it private, and we sent it to the people that could use it. And our satisfaction came when we heard that final verdict saying that Amanda and Raffaele were free forever. That's all we needed. So if you're a true advocate, that's your goal. That's what you're trying to reach. And I think that's important to keep in mind. It's important to know our place as advocates.
That's right. I think the other thing somebody undertaking a case should consider is trying to locate relevant people with relevant forensic or other expertise who are willing to work on the case either pro bono or perhaps at a reasonable rate. That has been very helpful in the Lobato case. We got, I think, the woman who is one of the experts who consults for CSI, establishing the time of death in that case, which was an important issue. I think it was very important in the Amanda Knox case, getting Ron Hendry, Steve Moore, and the various people on the DNA issue, as well as Saul Kassem on the confession issue.
Right.
Getting those people on board really adds to your credibility. Also, every time one of them comes up with a statement or something, it's a news hook to use for a story.
Sure, actively seeking out experts is important. Sometimes it's difficult to do, but I think that people need to politely contact some of the smaller innocence projects around the country. We actually had contacted Investigating Innocence, and they provided one expert that wrote an affidavit for the Jeffrey Havard case, which is now part of his appeal. So you will find people willing to volunteer their time if they find the case compelling. And if they don't take it, as a slant, just move on to the next one.
That's right. And you will be able to find people doing it, some people purely out of the goodness of their heart, and frankly, for people in a business like consulting or law, these cases can generate a lot of publicity for people, which can be a positive thing career-wise. So you'll be surprised if you have a good case that you may well be able to find experts willing to take a look at it.
Sure. Now, the Amanda Knox case was a unique case, and I never thought about it the first couple years because they actually had support before they were convicted. The early support, FOA, Friends of Amanda, started very early on. It was a small group, but one that deserves a lot of credit. The group consisted of producer Tom Wright, attorney Ann Bremner, scientist Mark Waterbury, and advocate Jim Lovering. Now, these people we all ended up working hand in hand together as time went by. But most cases that we have only gain support after the conviction. So this was a unique case that did have attention early on, and I think that did help to build the support as well after the conviction. And it's one of those benefits that other cases don't always have.
Again, that may be a feature of the Italian system where the trial lasted for months and months because they only have one session a week and then sometimes take a week off, which you would never have in the United States.
Sure.
With our jury trial system. You could just never schedule a jury trial that way.
That's a very good point. Like, I look at Jeff Havard's case. You have a couple days worth, of trial, including jury selection. The jury deliberates for 30 minutes, and he's sent off to death row, never to see daylight again. Very fast, very quick. There's not a lot of time for anybody to even think about the case, let alone build a support group around it.
That's right. And then the other difference between the two systems, and again, this is where I think the Italian system is superior, and I bet you never thought you'd hear me saying that, but in Italy, they have to write an opinion explaining why the person is guilty. And that opinion then allows you to look into the reasoning, pick it apart, determine where the weak points are, sometimes determine absolute factual errors. In the United States, you just get a thumbs up or thumbs down,
right,
and then you're fed to the lions.
Yeah, I like the benefit of that as well in Italy. I also look at it, there's never a perfect world because their system is also incredibly backed up because of the work that they have to provide. So it would cause longer time frames in the United States if they were told that the law was going to change and they needed to write an explanation. But boy, on some of these cases, wouldn't it be great if the judge and jury had to explain how they came to their conclusion?
Yeah. The point I'd like to make about the international case, too, and one that we spent many hours discussing, was comparing it to the U.S. or the U.K. when all of the law took place in Italy, and you sort of had to divorce yourself from how the Americans do it or how the British do it. You had to look solely at what was going on in Italy and how the Italians do it.
Absolutely. I don't know if in the near future we'll be taking another international case like this, but you never know. One thing I do know is we'll be much more prepared if we do it again in the future.
You never know.
Now, either one of you, is there any topic of advocacy that you wanted to touch base on here as we close up the show? Did I miss anything as far as pointers for those that are trying to advocate for other cases?
No, I think you touched on everything.
Yeah, I think one big point is if you find yourself in a situation with a loved one, a friend, or somebody case that's come to your attention, it really probably does make sense to contact our organization or one of the other organizations, the Innocence Project, there's the Centurion Ministries, there are a variety of these organizations. You can find them easily enough to contact them, see if they will sponsor or support your effort, or if not, provide you some pointers.
That's an excellent point. Like I mentioned previously, and you've just touched base on it again, very important. Don't be afraid to contact the Innocence Projects in your state. They just might help you. And if they do, you're going to be handed a very nice defense team. And they work great for indigent defendants. They're all volunteer, and they're very good at what they do. So I definitely recommend doing everything you can to get one of them on board.
Another suggestion is, whatever state you're in or municipality, wherever you are, visit the website of the law school and see if the law school has a clinical program dealing with wrongful convictions, or if there's a criminal law professor who has expressed an interest in this topic. Sometimes that can be a very, very good source of people willing to really put in a laboring oar on the project.
It's another great idea. There's a lot of Innocence Projects that use colleges to do their research, and you often will find that they have a program, so it's definitely worth looking into. Now, for those of you that are listening and want to talk to Phil about other cases, he is on our Injustice Anywhere forum quite frequently. He's one of our best posters on the page. We're really happy to have him on the forum. So head over to InjusticeAnywhereForum.com and get to know Phil a little bit better. Karen, you can find on Facebook and the forum. She's very active with the anything that has to do with the Amanda Knox case. It is winding down now, but there's still discussion here and there.
Yeah, I mean, I entered the forum and I still use the name Erasmus44. So for those of you who are wondering who that is, that's me. And I'm not. I just started out that way, so I'm going to keep it that way. Although I'm not trying to hide anything.
Well, it's good to mention the name so now people can find you. Well, I want to thank you both for joining us tonight. I think we covered the topic pretty well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
I'd like to end with one point is don't discount the power of one voice. When I started writing for Amanda in our local paper, I only set out to change the mind of my neighbors because nobody understood what had happened to her. And I ended up changing the mind of about 11,000 people. And that gave me the confidence to go forward with Ground Report. And I basically just started out with what I'd done for the Loop here on the island and took my voice out into the cyber world. And, and so one person can make a difference, and I did it. And you did it, Bruce, and Philip, you did it. There was a lot of us who just jumped on board and wrote about the case, and each of us ended up with a following, and our voices were heard.
It's a great point. Don't be afraid of failure. Just get out there and do it. If you fail, keep trying. Try something else. The person you're advocating for needs your voice. So you got to keep going, keep moving forward, and never give up. That's the best advice I could give anybody that's advocating, is to never give up. Because at some points in time, it's very easy to have that feeling when things don't seem to be going your way.
In the words of Galaxy Quest, never give up, never surrender.
Yeah, and having the private place for discussion, that was where we came and aired our grievances or we were frustrated. And so those private pages are great for, come in, blow off a little steam, and then put your game face back on and go out back into the world.
Those private pages are very important.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank both of you, and have a good night. I'll see you on Facebook and on the forum.
Thank you, Bruce.
Now, we will not have a show next Tuesday. I will be traveling downstate to attend Jamie Snow's hearing. So our next show will air on May 19th. And once again, we need your support to help build this new radio station. Please take a moment to follow the show page. You can sign in using Facebook. It only takes a minute. We need to build followers so we can open up new opportunities like iHeartRadio. Lastly, and this is off topic, but for me it's no less important, please visit our homepage. At the bottom right corner, you will see a link for Club 22. This link benefits the Cure Starts Now. When you have time, please take a moment to visit that site and learn more about Lauren Hill and her dream to find a cure for DIPG, a rare childhood cancer that took her life in April of this year. Lauren was an amazing advocate for her cause, and she now needs others to carry on the effort. So please take a look at that link when you get a chance. Thank you for tuning in to the Injustice Anywhere radio program. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.